Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and following the 3H's of the channel. And in this video, I have 4 absolutely bonkers encounters that I hope you'll love, and they're scary as hell too. So, if that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump and let's get into it. Thank you for watching. My cousins own a cabin and some woodland in Central Florida, and sometimes I camp out there with them. Sometimes we play a game called Manhunt. Some poor bastard draws the short straw and has 1 hour to hide in the woods. Then, everyone else goes after him with paintball guns with limited ammo. If he survives, quotes, the 5 hours in the woods, he wins. If the group catches him, they shoot, and then as compensation, he gets to choose the next prey. At our latest get-together, I was chosen to be the first prey. I drew the short straw. My cousins are all redneck hunters, but I'm the only guy there who doesn't really hunt, and I can't differentiate a duck call from a deer call. They give me an hour head start. I start to jog out into the woods, and then about 45 minutes later of searching around and going as deep as I can, I climb a tree. We start manhunt around 6, so there's some light towards the start and decent darkness by the end. But everyone gets flashlights, even me. The sun starts to set. As it begins to get dark, I hear this rustling and a scrunch up in a tree. I glance down, and I can barely make out a humanoid silhouette. I assumed that it was one of my cousins, and I remain hidden, sitting as still as I possibly can. And this is when shit got really weird. It walked in circles for quite a while, leaving my view, but always returning. After a few repeats of this, I realized that it wasn't one of my cousins. It barely even seemed sentient. Its head darted to and fro like a frightened deer, but it never looked up, and the more my eyes adjusted and the more attention I paid, the more I realized it's built wrong. It's lanky and wiry and thin and bent in weird places. After its 5th circle, I hear it. It's chittering to itself. It's almost like the sound of teeth clicking together and animalistic grunts. I resolve to shine a light at the creature upon its next circle. Worst case scenario, I scream for my cousins, hide in the tree, and hope. But I never got the chance. As it circles around again, I hear an audible pop from a paintball gun, a horrible screech, like a cross between a parrot and a goat, and then one of my cousins yelling. I drop out of the tree and I run in that direction, because I'm basically the white guy in a horror movie. I find my youngest cousin, Darren, sprawled out on the ground, panting to himself. I run up and call his name. He raises his gun and shoots me dead in the chest, and then says, "Oh shit," like he wouldn't have done that anyway if he hadn't ran into the weird hide-behind thing. He helps himself up, and then me up. We quickly meet with the rest of the group, and Darren finally elects to explain what happened. He says that he was sneaking up behind a tree that he thought that I was in, when he saw something move out of the corner of his eye. He acted on pure instinct, turned, and fired at it. The paintball hit, and the thing wailed in shock. He screamed and raised his flashlight. He saw long, spindly legs and 2 enormous frog or doe eyes, and then the thing unfolded. I think he meant unfurled, but I don't know. He says the thing's body unrolled like a bunch of posters, and then it just wasn't there anymore. I back up the story, saying that I saw it too, but the other cousins just laugh at us and call us dumbasses. Every time we meet up, we bring it up, and no one ever believes us. I don't really blame them either. It's really surreal to see that. This happened in 2011, and I can't really give more of a description than a woodland in Central Florida. My uncle was in the UN peacekeeping force, and he spent time in the deepest, darkest, dankest heart of Central Africa, and he has some stories. Now, I can't remember every single detail, but I'll try my best here. One story is he was attached to a Belgian commando. This Belgian guy was an awful person, and he did awful things, but the UN keeps secrets, and this was one of the dirty ones. But one night, the Belgian dude goes out and has his way with one of the local ladies of the evening. The Belgian dude comes back, sweating profusely. My uncle asks him, is he okay? The Belgian dude jumps and says, dude, what the F, get off me. My uncle is shocked. He was nowhere near him. The Belgian commando the next morning claimed that he felt someone licking his ear. He refuses to talk about it. 3 days later, the village is in an uproar over his UN attachment. Apparently, something terrible happened to one of the local women. My uncle is very suspicious, but there's not a whole lot he can do at this point. And this is where stuff gets weird. My uncle is quite superstitious, and he loves to learn about everything of the occult. He goes out of the camp to discreetly ask about African magic and some dolls that he'd seen some people using. He just wanted to know this for personal learning, not to actually do any of it. He came across a voodoo priestess in a ceremony. My uncle asks her, why is there a baby on the platform? The voodoo priestess says that this is not a baby. She is invoking an Ndombe to find out who did stuff to her sister. My uncle puts two and two together and asks for the sister's name. My uncle comes back with evidence, but he's scared to tell off the Belgian dude because he's much bigger than him. Later that night, my uncle and his bunkmates hear horrible shouting and things crashing in the Belgian commando's bunker, as if he is shouting at someone to get away from him. Everyone but my uncle eventually falls asleep, and then he sneaks out to get a cigarette break. He sees a very tiny human being waddle past the fence, carrying something long. He's really weirded out by this. The next morning, the camp is in an uproar over the Belgian commando. Apparently, the Belgian tried to end his life by slashing his own thigh, but the Belgian was super hysterical at this point, saying that he was trying to do no such thing, and saying that this little imp thing tried to do it. My uncle believes him, but says that wasn't an imp. Next, I'll tell you about when he saw something weird again. The backstory here is to look up a creature called a Grootslang or an Inkanyamba. Both are apparently different entities, but both are reported from southern Africa. So this was before the previous incident. This was back in the 1980s. This was the height of the apartheid civil unrest in South Africa. My uncle hated South Africa because he found everyone there to just be backwards, hypercritical, snobbish, and everything else about nearly everything. But he was there on a UN peacekeeping task force on the Botswana-South Africa border. My uncle loved it in Botswana because they were friendly and the nature was stunning. So my uncle decides to take a trip with two of his attachmates to this nearby swamp. My uncle once again invokes his esoteric knowledge of the arcane to try and spook his buddies. He said that legend talks of a weird creature called the Grootslang, which has the body of a snake and the head of an elephant. The story fails to make the other two men scared. They just laugh at my uncle for being such a terrible storyteller. So it's late in the afternoon. A thunderstorm rolls in. All three have found a bluff 3 meters above the river to avoid flooding. One guy decides to take advantage of a lull in the storm and wants to set up his fishing pole. My uncle and the other guy proceed to drink. And here's where you can say it gets interesting. My uncle throws a rock into the river away from the third guy who was fishing, just to try and freak him out, make him jump. The second guy makes funny monster sounds to further scare their buddy. But then suddenly, something replies to the monster sounds. They believe it to be their third buddy, likely calling out their bluff. They're waiting for a human response this time, but there's no answer. They both go back to where their friend was fishing. At some point during the walk back to camp, they get separated. My uncle leaves behind the second guy. The third guy at camp asks, "Did you hear some odd noises around here?" My uncle pretends not to know anything. And then suddenly, both the men heard it again. Both of them have their machetes out because, at this point, they don't know what it is, but they don't want to take any chances. The second guy actually throws his machete into the bushes, and someone starts laughing. It turns out it was the third guy who pranked both of them. My uncle was not impressed, but the second guy was laughing like mad and asks my uncle to retrieve the machete. My uncle goes ahead and notices a nice clearing next to a slope overlooking the river. So, later that night, my uncle takes yet another cigarette break. It's super dark out. He doesn't even think of taking a torchlight. At some point while walking, my uncle trips. His hands grip on a tree trunk that was on the ground. Wait a minute. The tree trunk starts to move ever so slowly. In fact, the bark felt unnaturally smooth. He realizes that whatever he's grabbed onto is making this terrible, low noise. He scrambles to his feet and runs back to the camp. He tells his buddies what he just experienced. Both men were tired of pranks. They hadn't caught any fish, but then they started to talk. There were no fish. There were no animals. There were not even any birds around their campsite. My uncle maintains that this thing was not a snake. We have large pythons in my country, and they certainly cannot be mistaken for a tree trunk, even if they are rested on the ground in the dark. So my cousin's learned his lesson about never driving loads without a gun, and he ends up needing that gun in another story I could tell. It's not really paranormal, but I might tell it if people are interested in it. He also learned, like a lot of drivers do, that the real money is out west, driving long-ass hauls to various podunk old mining towns, still trying to stay alive out in the mountains or the desert. That's big, open, unforgiving country, and there aren't many people willing to and or capable of driving across it for 12 hours trying to beat a deadline. There are even fewer drivers that you can count on to do it consistently, since just about all the ones willing to do it in the first place are souped up on meth, coke, or whatever the hell else will keep them up long enough to see a delivery through to its completion. My cousin, as we've established, is clean and has been for a really long time. He's a hard worker, he's desperate for cash, and he's got a good van. He doesn't make excuses. He doesn't get pulled over driving loads of stuff that he hasn't weighed. All this means that my cousin is a very in-demand man. And what's more, it means that he ends up doing a lot of high-leverage jobs that need to be done quickly and correctly, and as such, those jobs pay very, very well. So basically, this story begins with my uncle being asked to do such a job. A good, trustworthy dispatcher has a client who needs an assload of parts delivered to his business in Flagstaff for an order that has to be assembled and sent off ASAP. They need the parts by the next day. The problem is, my uncle is in Denver, and that's an 11-hour drive through hard mountains and desert. Making matters worse, the load is technically too heavy for his van. But the client is desperate, however, and the dispatcher is willing to pay a ludicrous amount of money to get those things there on time. We're talking $3,000 for 11 hours of work, with gas paid for, in like 2015. A random fact about my uncle is that I've always called him Uncle Bill, but he's technically my cousin, but he's kind of always functioned as my uncle, and is also a lot older than me. But I can assure you that he's my cousin and not my uncle. I just call him that. Random, but I figured I'd throw it in. So he hooks up with the dispatcher, and they load the van as full as it's ever been. If a cop pulls him over, he's screwed. He sets out plenty early after a full night's sleep. Now, most of the drive is totally uneventful, though a cop does pull alongside my cousin in Utah and eyes him suspiciously before peeling off to pull over a speeder. My cousin heads south through the Navajo Nation just as sun begins to set. This is his first time in the nation, and he's going in with the darkness. Uncle Bill always said that it was creepy out there in the middle of nowhere. But this night happens to be absolutely beautiful. Stars as far as the eye can see, and he feels like that his van could just lift right off the old highway and float through them. He's passing the time pleasantly enough, thinking back to a time that he spent on a reservation back in the Midwest. We're part Ojibwe, when something catches the corner of his eye. Black blurs are flitting along the very edge of his brights, off to the left and very far ahead. He turns his head as he drives past, and of course, he can't see anything, since it's dark as hell. But the shapes persist. He rubs his eyes, shakes his head, and tries to refocus on the road. But they're still there. He's gone several miles now, but the shapes are staying in front of him. He wonders if there's something wrong with his headlights. Maybe a dead bug got inside of them. Then, there's a long flat patch of desert illuminated by the moon, and he gets his first good look. He thinks, wolves? Maybe a quarter of a mile directly to the left of his car? No, it's only one wolf. It's running really weirdly, but it's keeping up with him. As soon as he thinks this, the wolf starts to lag behind a bit, and he has to deliberately remind himself to pay attention to the road so that he doesn't veer off of it. But when he checks back, the wolf is still lingering, still a quarter of a mile off, shuffling weirdly about perpendicular to his blind spot. He's losing it, he decides. No effing way, right? But the wolf keeps going. And then something happens, my cousin says, which he will never forget. He doesn't like us to tell this story, or any story really. He's a very private dude, and in fact only told me after he had seen something else for the first time in over a year, and after that we have been up all night at a family event. But he swears that it's true. He's disturbed. He checks for cops and bumps his van up to 80 miles per hour, trying to leave the weird-ass cheetah wolf thing behind. For a second, it seems to work. The wolf is fully behind him. He feels satisfied. But then the hair on the back of his neck stands up, and he breaks out into a cold sweat. Something twitches in the corner of his eye. He looks over his shoulder. It's the wolf. It's keeping up with him again, only this time it's sprinting on its hind legs. My cousin does a double take. Eyes are bugging out of his head and floors it. Then the wolf takes an angle of pursuit. He's frantically looking over his shoulder and back at his speedometer. He's hardly glancing at the road. The wolf is drawing closer, even as my cousin pushes the pedal down. Before too long, the wolf is running on the edge of the road, and then slowly starts to veer across to the other lane. About a mile ahead, my cousin sees two big headlights barreling down the opposite lane. He decides he's going to do everything in his power to make sure that semi-truck hits that wolf, because he is in a full-on adrenaline-fueled panic. He's gulping, sweating so badly his hands are slipping on the wheel, breathing loudly through his mouth. The wolf keeps inching closer. Finally, my cousin flat out floors it with everything he's got. The engine whines, straining against the heavy load. The semi barrels toward them, and in the instant before the semi hits the wolf, blaring its horn as loudly as it can, the wolf is right next to my cousin's driver's side window. I've never seen Bill lie before. This is what he says happened. I don't know what to believe. He said that it pressed its body flat against his car and stretched into a black shadow. Eventually, he swears it takes on a humanoid form with an exaggerated set of facial features that it presses against his window. As the semi blazes past, it smashes its huge eyes and Cheshire cat grin flat against his window to the point where it fogs up on the outside. He can't tear his eyes from its eyes. It's the most malicious smile that he's ever seen, and something feels wrong, icy cold in the very core of him. Once the semi is past, the thing leaps away, shrieking with ear-splitting laughter and perching on a nearby rock. My cousin can hardly breathe, and he vomits into the seat next to him and continues to floor it. The thing stays behind, screaming and gasping with laughter. He makes it to the drop. He's still cold and nauseous. He can't look the client in the eye. He smells like vomit. He tells the client his story. Again, Bill is a very quiet and very private dude. He must have been shaken to his core to say anything about this, especially to a stranger. The client is certain that he's drunk, and my cousin refuses to ever deliver for him or drive through the nation again. At the urging of one of the workers at the client's warehouse, my cousin goes to see a Navajo medicine man, though, who brushes him with feathers and gives him a blessing. My cousin pukes again and feels right as rain. And that's the story of the time that my cousin met a trickster or a skinwalker. So just before I end the video, I'd like to, dedicate it to my oldest cat who passed away on Monday. He was a very cuddly cat, very, full of personality and everything. He was 17 years old, and I had him since I was a kid. So, it hurt a lot to see him go, but I know that it was for the best, and I know that he's not in pain anymore. But if anybody has an animal that they've lost recently, you know the feeling. It sucks. So, I just wanted to dedicate, this video to my cat. I'll put up a picture of him now. This is not the cat who was in some of the previous videos, and, of course, I would like to dedicate this video to anybody who has a birthday this week, because my mom's birthday was this week. So, happy birthday to my mom, and R.I.P. to my cat, Cloudy. And with that, and as always, if you would like to say which one of the stories was your favorite one, let me know down in the comments. If you have one of your own, or would like to donate to the channel, I have an email in the description below, as well as links to a PayPal and a Patreon, and of course, super thanks here on YouTube. And with that, I hope you have a good week, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching.